darkness is not an affirmative force. It simply reoccupies the space vacated by the light.
This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
It should be uncomfortable for a believer to live as a hypocrite.
Delivering people out of the bondage of mainstream media
and the philosophies of this world.
God has called you and me to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment. Let's not miss our moment.
And now, the Hamilton Corner.
Welcome to the program. Alex McFarland here. We've got a great show today. I'm honored to be sitting in for attorney pastor Abe Hamilton. We're going to talk about a number of things, and we've got some special guests. Later on in the program, we'll speak with John Hauser. He's the author of a book, The Destruction of Liberty, the Creation of the Socialist Aristocracy. And then right now we have Bill Federer. Bill is a longtime friend and colleague, and Bill has got a number of resources that are just modern-day classics in defense of God and country. One, Socialism. Now listen to this subtitle by Bill Federer. Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present, How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control. Winston Churchill, one of my heroes, I've written and spoken extensively on Churchill, but Winston Churchill said socialism is a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. Its inherent virtue is the equal sharing of misery. That's true. Why anyone would want to go there or promote that in what otherwise was a free, safe, prosperous America is anybody's guess. But as is so often the case, just a voice of reason, a voice of truth, and always enlightening history that we probably otherwise wouldn't have known. William J. Bill Federer, longtime friend and colleague. Bill, I know you're just getting off of an airplane. The Lord is using you all over the Western Hemisphere speaking. Before we dive into the subject on socialism and the threat it poses for our country, tell us your website, and for those who may be unfamiliar, tell us about the work you do as we welcome you to the program, Bill.
Well, thank you, Alex. My website's AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com, and I send out a history email that gives history in light of what's going on today, and emphasizing the role of faith. And the book, Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present, it documents how Plato was the first one that talked about everybody owning everything in common. And it sounds good till you think it through. Somebody has to be in the government handing out the common stuff, and they're always going to give a little extra to their family and friends on the side and hold back from someone they don't like. And before you know it, it gets discretionary. And the saying is, he who holds the purse strings has the power. So every attempt at everybody owning everything equally ends up with a deep state bureaucracy passing out favors to their friends and persecuting their enemies. And so socialism is a bait and switch for dictatorship. And, if democracies and republics are attempts to take the power of a king and give it to the people, what if the king wants it back? Does it just ask for it? So there's two methods. One, fear. If you get the population into fear, they'll panic and trade their freedom for security. And the second is free stuff. You have the government give out free stuff till everybody gets dependent, and then you want some more free stuff. You're going to have to incrementally give up your freedom until it's like a drug dealer takes over a neighborhood two ways. He comes in with guns, gets people into fear, and they submit to the mob and pay extortion protection money in exchange for being left alive. Or the drug dealer's so nice, he's giving away free drugs until you get hooked, and then you want some more free drugs, or you're going to sell yourself into prostitution. And so America has experienced a free republic, and but after every crisis, we see power concentrating into fewer and fewer hands, and then we see this happening on a global level, and then we see dependency. And there's this effort to get as many people dependent on the government health care, government welfare, government entitlements, and then once they do that, they control you. Because they can threaten to cut those off unless you give them the permission to track you and take away your freedoms and so forth. So what we're seeing in America is a reversion back to the default setting for human government. And that's, socialism, but socialism is really dictatorship. It's a ruling class. And
Bill, have you been concerned that
it's a gang?
all of these illegals coming in across the southern and to an extent northern borders as well, and the homeless encampments, Bill, as I travel, for years I've seen large homeless encampments in California. And I've preached in California about 30 different times over the last 15 years. And it's nothing to see homeless encampments in like San Bernardino and the Bay Area. But now in Atlanta, in parts of Texas, in Chicago, in parts of the continental U.S. that you otherwise wouldn't have seen, do you believe all of these homeless encampments, the 8 million people that have come into the country illegally during the Biden administration, is this growing the base of the socialized masses? Do you believe that?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to answer that. One is if crime is allowed to go up in the big cities, some people feel unsafe and move out. Who? Well, pro-family people, right? You don't want kids in a crime area. Well, pro-family people, they tend to be a larger percentage Republican. Who else moves out? Well, pro-business people. If your stores are getting robbed and windows smashed and police are being ordered to stand down and nobody wants to go shopping when there's people wandering around the parking lot that could rob you. And so if pro-business people leave, well, they're a higher percentage Republican. Well, who's left in the big cities? Well, more people that are dependent on government entitlements and handouts. Well, they're a higher percentage Democrat. And in election years, everybody that left the city, their name stays on the voter rolls. And so when there's an election year, whoever wins the big city ends up somehow winning the whole state. Isn't that interesting? And whoever wins the state gets all the electoral votes for the state, and the president's elected by electoral votes. So they literally have a political strategy to let crime go up in the big cities intentionally on purpose to cause pro-family, pro-business people to leave. And so when they leave, their name stays on the voter roll, and then they can do voter fraud and nobody questions it. The other is elections and voting. I was in Texas. Louis Gohmert came to hear me talk. I was in Tyler, Texas. And the organizer of the event said, when you get your driver's license, you have a little box that you can check called citizen. And when the people that come across the border get their driver's license, they can check that citizen box. She said, I've asked everybody in the Texas government, is there anybody that checks to see if somebody checks the citizen box that they actually are a citizen? She said, nobody. I've gone through all these departments in Texas. It's the honor system. All they got to do is check that little box and their driver's license says citizen. And so the Biden administration has people processing these people that come across the border. And when they were asking Mayorkas if they're being registered to vote, he says, well, I'm not in charge of voter enrollment. And it's like, you're not denying that. And I have reports that the airplanes will land with illegals and they'll pull past the terminal and park the plane. And then buses come up and they put these people on the buses and then ship them to cities all around America. And I was in
So it's not like INS.
Out of motel.
Bill, whenever I come back into America and I have to go through customs, so you're saying that planes bringing, plane loads of passengers that are non-citizens pull past the terminal, they deplane, get on buses without going through customs and INS
Correct.
Like the rest of us.
Correct.
This is tragic. Let me just say this. I mean, there are political positions that we agree with or disagree with, and policies that we think are good and think are bad. But the subverting of a nation, the intentional, the legal word I suppose is treason, but the spiritual word, this is wickedness, isn't it? This is darkness. This is evil.
Well, when I wrote my book on socialism, I was studying the Cold War. So after World War II, you had brand new countries come into existence, right, that were part of these other empires. And so Romania, Albania, the Yugoslavia, different, India becomes independent of Britain, countries in Africa. And the Soviet Union did not like these countries being free and electing their little free leaders. And so they would do something called critical theory. They would send in KGB agents, and all they would do was study and observe all the groups in the country and categorize them as victims and oppressors, haves and have-nots. Ethnically, Bosnians, Croats, Serbs; religiously, Sunni, Shia, Orthodox; economically, racially, didn't matter. And then they would pit them against each other to have protests and riots and destabilize the country. And their goal was to get the riots to break into bloodshed. Why? Once you get people emotional, they're not going to talk reason anymore. My friend just got killed. I don't want to sit and talk theory with you. And then once they're emotional, then they want to channel that emotion and blame the new leader of the country for all the problems. And so they co-opt the media and with bribes and threats to blame this democratically elected leader for all these problems. And as this leader's popularity drops, they would do a coup or a rigged election and replace the leader with a Soviet puppet. And country after country after country, they're called color revolutions. And then our CIA learned how to do the same thing in reverse. And they helped in Egypt, Project FF, overthrow Fuad and put in, Nasser. But then the first one that we completely orchestrated was Operation Ajax, overthrowing the leader of Iran. So the leader of Iran, 1953, was Mossadegh, and he was beginning to side with the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was our enemy, and we didn't like that. And so Allen Dulles, head of the CIA, sends Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt. He's an expert in foreign languages. He goes to Tehran, and he does the KGB thing in reverse. He recruits mobsters and gangsters and radical imams and divides the country into groups and stages protests and riots and co-ops the media to blame Mossadegh for all these problems, and Mossadegh's popularity drops, and then they do a coup, put him under house arrest, lock him away, and replace him with the Shah, who loved America because we helped put him in. But these tactics have been perfected for 70 years, and under Obama, they began to be used against us on our own soil. And
so
in
let me ask you this.
He passed the...
let me ask you this. We're months away from an election, 2024. What hopes do you have that it will be an honestly, regardless of who the candidates are on either side, because that's maybe a bit of a question, but how confident are you that it will be an honestly tabulated election?
Yeah, so it's gone from go out and vote to we need churches to go out and get involved in the process and go through the training so you can be the person on the other side of the desk asking to see people's driver's license. And they found just by having a couple Christians involved in the process makes it harder for them to do voter fraud. Oh, we want to run these ballots through the machines multiple times, but there's a Christian over there. We got to hide. One was a gentleman organized in a state where they had drop boxes, and you're only supposed to drop off your own personal ballot. And so he got wind that they were going to have these people, these mules, these people dropping off handfuls of ballots. And so he organized these churches where they got guys with their lawn chairs and their iced tea and their cell phones, and they would just sort of sit there near the drop-off box. And somebody would get out of their car with handfuls of these forged ballots, and they would walk toward the drop-off box, and they would see these guys with their phones just sort of sitting there, and they would turn around and get back in their car and drive to another drop-off box because they would get paid like $50 per fraudulent ballot. And then they would see some other guys, and then they would drive to another drop-off box, and then they threw off their game, and then the polling closed, and they weren't able to drop off their ballots. And that's how in Virginia, Youngkin won. But so these, it's not just go do your part and vote. No, it's get involved in the system. In some states, I was just in Oregon over the weekend, they allow ballot harvesting. What's ballot harvesting? That's where you have somebody going collecting the ballots and turning them in. So they're telling their church members, you go through the training, and we're going to collect the ballots here at the church. We're going to have the church people go through the training, and it's going to be legal. And you can go to your neighbors and ask them.
Hey, we got to take a break. Hang tight, Bill. We're going to come back. Alex McFarland here. We're talking with Bill Federer. Socialism, will it be our future? Let's hope not.
Shining light into the darkness. This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the program. Alex McFarland here. The voice you heard in that first segment, that's a prolific author, just honestly one of the most brilliant analysts and thinkers that I know. It's Bill Federer. His website is AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. I don't say this lightly, but Bill Federer is one of the people I urge you to own and read every book he writes. They're amazing. And he's got a new book, Socialism, The Real History, From Plato to the Present. Now, listen, how the deep state capitalizes on crises to consolidate control. Bill, before the break, and sorry I had to cut you off, but we had this hard break, but you were talking about ways to be involved. And, it's seems daunting enough just to get people to vote. I was recently on a program with George Barna, and Barna was lamenting the fact that many, many, many Christians, conservatives and Christians, don't vote. Many, many pastors don't urge their parishioners to vote. But you're saying not only should we vote, we need to be involved and volunteer at the polling places and watch the ballot boxes. Resume that line of thought, if you would, Bill.
Yeah. As more power concentrates into fewer hands globally, God's counterbalance is to get more people involved locally. Let me say that again.
Okay.
As more power concentrates into fewer hands globally, God's counterbalance is to get more and more people involved locally. I'm convinced God wants to have an end-time revival, but it's not going to be through one or two preachers. It's going to be through everybody being involved, the body of Christ being the body of Christ, an eye, an ear, a foot, right? So the push is to get us involved. I have another book that's new. It's called Silence Equals Consent, the Sin of Omission. And it's this idea that the same way that you're silent at a wedding ceremony, you're giving your consent to the wedding vows. Speaking now, forever hold your peace. Well, if a church member's silence gives consent to wedding vows, it gives consent to other things. It's called the rule of tacit admission, TACIT. And it's in real estate law. You have an apartment or a piece of property and somebody's squatting in it, and you're silent. You know about it, but you're not trying to charge them rent or evict them. They can gain title to your property through adverse possession just by you being silent. It's a debt collection law. Somebody owes you money. You wait 10 years to try to start collecting. The judge will say you're past the statute of limitations. If you really thought they owed you money, you would not have waited and been silent for so long. It's in trademark law. You design a trademark, somebody copies it, and you know about it, and you let them use it. You're not trying to defend your copyright. The judge will let them use it.
Yeah, there's a phrase, you get grandfathered in, right?
Yeah. Constitution, Article 1, Section 7. Congress passes a bill, puts it on the president's desk. Quote, if any bill shall not be returned by the president within 10 days, the same shall be a law in like manner as if he had signed it. All the president has to do is let the bill lay on his desk for 10 days and just be silent. And his silence equals his signature. And so if church members are silent when they're killing babies, they're giving consent to killing babies. They're giving their tacit admission. If they're mutilating children and the church members are silent, they're giving consent to mutilating children. The left has a tactic. It's called you want to guilt trip Christians into being more Christian than Christ. You say, what? So, yeah, if you're really Christian, you'll be silent and give your tacit approval to us teaching the trans agenda to kids. Well, would Jesus teach the trans agenda? Well, we know what Jesus taught. Matthew 19, he who made them at the beginning made them male and female. So they're saying if you're really a Christian, you'll let us teach something to the kids Jesus would never teach to the kids. In other words, if you're really Christian, you won't act like Christ. I mean, think of it. Here are school teachers who cannot even define woman. Yeah. And they think they can tell that a little boy is supposed to be a little girl. And they can even take the children away from the family if the family's not supportive of that. But they can't even define woman. It's insanity. And church members are silent. And by their silence, they're giving approval to that. And Jesus said, if you allow one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, better that a millstone be put around your neck and be thrown in the depths of the sea. So it's going to be a rude awakening for all these churches that say, oh, we don't get involved in politics. We just preach the gospel. We're a little bit holier than you are because we're able to resist this temptation to care about what kind of country we're leaving our kids.
Hey,
It's
Bill,
sort
let
of
me
like
ask you this.
Hezekiah.
Well, let me ask you this: how do you get around the Christians that they avoid conflict or the even appearance of conflict at any cost? You know, and I travel and preach, and I mean, I preach and teach on all the hot button volatile issues, but I've had so many Christians say, you know, we just don't like conflict. But speak to us, if you would, about the fact that you know, we might not like the battles that lie before us, but if we don't speak out, not only are we, like you say, giving tacit approval, but sometimes the assignment to the church is to speak out and to make waves. Would you agree?
Right. Every parent has to go through this. I mean, you want to just love your kids all the time, but there comes a time when you have to correct them. You don't just say, oh, how do you feel today? If you left the kids up to their feelings, they would eat candy all day long and their teeth would rot out of their head. Right? You're the adult. The verse everyone knows, Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself. Do you know the verse right before it? Confront your neighbor directly so you will not incur their guilt upon you. Another translation says, rebuke your neighbor directly so you'll not get the blame of their sin upon you. In other words, they're loving each other and they're rebuking each other. It says, rebuke a wise man and he'll love you. Better to hear the rebuke of the wise than the song of fools. New Testament, if your brother sin, rebuke him. It says, be instant in season, out of season. Reprove, rebuke. You know, Jesus, his first sermon ended with them wanting to push him off a cliff. Another sermon ended with them picking up stones to stone him. Another sermon ends with people saying, this is a difficult thing. Who can bear it? And they stand up and walk out of church. They walk with him no more. He didn't run after him and say, oh, you misunderstood me. No, he turns to the 12 and says, you want to go too? To the humble, Jesus was loving as can be, but to the prideful, Jesus was tough as nails. You know, some people say, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to wait for the rapture and have Jesus rescue me out of this mess. I have a question for you. Who do you think you're going to meet when you're raptured? Jesus. Mm-hmm. Does Jesus love the little children? Oh, yeah. You think he might wonder why you didn't do anything to protect them? I mean, we're not in North Korea or China where you don't vote. We're in America where the citizen is the king and the politicians are your servants. You tell them what to do. And even if we can't turn it around, shouldn't we at least try?
Yeah. You know, and I think about this, Bill. I know all of my adult life, I've heard people, you know, my friend, the late Chuck Colson would say, this next election is the key. This is a pivotal, you know, it's a crossroad moment for America. But really, I do believe that here in 2024. I mean, 4 more years of Democrat, socialist imposition. I honestly think this election, and I know the Lord can do anything. A sovereign God can rule and overrule. Glory to God. But Bill, if we continue the road that we're on of open borders, destabilizing the country, wokeness, abolition of gender, abolition of all moral boundaries, I think we are in the last moments of opportunity during which our nation might be saved. Am I overstating it, Bill?
Yeah, and the sovereign God will bring judgment if we don't repent. And all throughout the Bible, Deuteronomy 28, if you hearken to the voice of the Lord, you'll be above and not beneath, the head and not the tail. The blessings will chase you down. If you don't hearken to the voice of the Lord, the diseases of Egypt will come upon you. The stranger will come in amongst you and rise up above you, and they'll be the head and you'll be the tail. How did God judge ancient Israel? Well, when they sinned and sacrificed children, he let the other countries come in. The Amalekites, Moabites, Hittites, termites, mosquito bites, all the ites, right? And he let them come in and oppress them. And then when they repented, he'd raise up a deliverer. And so, this is our heart, and all the nation is a bunch of individuals. And if you're silent in the face of sin, you're giving your approval. You know, never before in my life have I seen Satan clubs on elementary school campuses, Satan worshiping Grammys, Satan trans clothes designers for Target, Satan Disney FX cartoons, Satan statues in the Iowa State. It's like God's letting the curtain be pulled back. Hello, Satan. And on the other side, people are being bolder for God. and we're the bride of Christ, and every romance novel builds up to a decision-making moment. I think God's pushing the world, and he says, okay, we're getting close to the end of this romance novel. I need you to make your decision. I'm going to make it really easy. God, devil, choose. And some people are going to be so used to going along, I'm just going. I don't want to say anything. They're killing kids. They're mutilating little kids. And some are going to be silent and give their tacit approval to that.
Yeah.
And others are going to say, you know what, I tolerated something and I stretched the rubber band and tolerated something else, but I can't be silent when they want to do a hysterectomy on a little 8-year-old girl because she went through a tomboy phase. I can't be silent when they want to castrate a little boy because he played with his sister's dolls, and they cut the rubber band and it snaps back, and the decision's made, the division. And I think God's pushing the world to see through our actions what we can stomach and what we won't. If
Bill,
we're not
we're
going to
gonna
play a good offense, let's at least play a good defense.
we're going to have to pull away. I want you to, if you would, give us a final thought, give us your website and your most recent book title.
Right. So AmericanMinute.com is my website, AmericanMinute.com. And the latest book is Silence Equals Consent, The Sin of Omission. Speak Now or Forever Lose Your Freedom.
If you had one challenge to the American people, Bill Federer, what would it be? What would be your clarion call to this nation?
You know, people say God knows my heart. It's like, yeah, he knew Abraham's heart, but he still wanted to see Abraham be willing to take his son Isaac to the top of Mount Moriah. I mean, imagine a guy watching football and you say, hey, when was the last time you told your wife you love her? And he's like, I can't remember, but she knows my heart. It's like, okay. When was the last time you did anything to show your wife you love her? It's like, I can't remember, but she knows my heart. It's like, dude, we need to have a little talk here.
Yes.
People say, God knows my heart. Yes, he does. And he wants to hear some words out of your mouth, and he wants to see some actions. Right? I mean, if you love a girl, you're looking out the window and the guy says, I love her, and she's getting beat up on the parking lot. And he's just looking out the window, I love her. You don't love her. If you love her, you do something, right? You show your what's in your heart through your actions. And if you're able to just keep silent when all that evil is going on, it says in the last days, the love of many will wax cold because sin will abound.
Bill, thank you so much. We've got to change gears here. That the voice you were just hearing is Bill Federer. We're going to continue in a moment with John Hauser, who's the author of a book on creeping socialism in America. My name is Alex McFarland. By the way, my newly redesigned website is alexmcfarland.com. And as you're hearing this program, I'm on my way to the first of 7 youth camps. I'm so excited, and I give God the glory. Oh, I'm so thankful for the American Family Radio Network. Tim Wildman allows me to promote the things that I do outside of the AFR radio world. If you recognize my voice, it's probably because the show that you hear 5 days a week live, which is Exploring the Word, Bert Harper and myself. And Bert and I, our second book is 100 Bible Questions and Answers for Families. And just earlier this week, Bert and I were doing an interview in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, promoting that book. I completely give God the glory that we've done 2 books from Exploring the Word, and we're working on the third. But because of the platform of the American Family Association, we were doing 1 and then 2 youth camps for about 15 years. Now we've got 7 youth camps. We'll have 1,200 middle school and high schoolers in 7 camps this summer, the first of which begins this week in Montana. I want you to please pray as we talk to these kids about God and country. And let me just say, it would probably thrill most of your hearts to know how eager young people are to know truth. They really are. Everywhere I go, we're teaching biblical worldview. Now, worldview is what does the Bible say? What is the uniquely scriptural worldview? About what? Obviously, salvation, but about life, marriage, morality, even economics. You know, the Bible has a lot to say about economics, education. And in the 7 youth camps that we'll be doing this summer, again, the first of which begins this week in Montana, please keep us in prayer. These kids are so hungry, and they respond. People ask me, do the kids really respond to apologetics, learning how to defend the Christian faith and the biblical worldview? Yes, they do. Like thirsty people getting cool water on a hot day. And I praise God. We have these kids. You would love it. I'll put this on social media this summer. But we have, imagine 300 kids shouting, "We are the generation who will save America." I'm sure it's enough to make, a liberal's head pop off. These middle school and high schoolers saying, "We are the generation that will save America." The other thing that I want to make mention of, in July, just a few weeks away, I'll be at the Cove, the Billy Graham Training Center in Western North Carolina. The Cove, and I'll be teaching 1 John. It's my 18th summer there, and I give God the glory for that. And I look forward to you being there. The lodging, let me say this, I want you to meet our next guest. The lodging on site is sold out. However, there are hotels across the highway, and it's just amazing. The website is thecove.org, THECOVE, thecove.org, and I would love to see you there at the Billy Graham Training Center in Western North Carolina. Well, this is the American Family Radio Network, Alex McFarland. I'm going to change gears here, and I want you to meet an author, John Anthony Hauser. He's got an amazing history. He is originally, like myself, raised on a farm, but he grew up in northern Wisconsin, and he has been very illustrious as an author, speaker. John, I am so sorry. We've got a break. Say hello, give us your website, and then we're going to come back after this brief break and talk about your book. John Hauser, welcome.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here. I am John Anthony Hauser, and my website is www.jahauser, that's HAUSER.com.
All right. Sorry to have you right up on a break, but we'll have a brief commercial here. We'll come back and meet John Hauser and his book on socialism. Very important stuff. Stay tuned. We've got a brief break. More, the destruction of liberty, the American socialist aristocracy. Just the sound of that gives me chills. We'll discuss after this.
The Hamilton Quarter podcast and 1-minute commentaries are available at afr.net. Back to the Hamilton Quarter on American Family Radio.
They say don't judge a book by its cover, but I'm telling you, here's a book that I really think that it's a riveting read. The Destruction of Liberty, Creating the American Socialist Aristocracy. The author's our guest now, John Anthony Hauser. Mr. Hauser, thanks for holding and welcome to the program. Talk about this. I think a lot of people believe America is self-destructing before our very eyes. I guess my twofold question to begin with, are we doing that? And if so, what can be done about it?
I do believe we are self-destructing. Joseph Stalin had an interesting take on America. And he's sort of the icon, one of the icons of socialism throughout history. And he basically said America is a strong country, but it's based on three things. It's spirituality, it's morality, and it's work ethic. And if we can undermine those three areas, it will collapse from within. And the socialists in this country have been very successful at undermining this country in those three areas. And so the first part of my book is basically a philosophical explanation of where I'm going with that sort of theme. There are many reasons for why socialism is an insidious ideology, and the first 7 chapters of my book are why it's on the wrong side of history, the wrong side of economics, the wrong side of God and Christianity, the wrong side of Constitution and individual freedom, the wrong side of human nature, it's the wrong side of competency and accountability, and it's the wrong side of arrogance and false religion. Mm-hmm. The second part of my book is basically giving examples of how this is playing out in American life today. Everything from public education to cancel culture, victimhood as a goal and way of life, and the media. It's just they have implanted themselves in our society to the point where the health of the nation is not their first goal. It's
That's
the destruction of the nation.
You're doing such a good job to point out this. And folks, I would urge you to read this book by John Anthony Hauser. You say the wrong side of history, economics, the wrong side of God, human nature, freedom. It's true. And Mr. Hauser, I've debated these people at universities, and so many of these people, at least in the world of leftist woke academics, it's like I jokingly told my wife, they're wrong on everything. I mean, if you said water is wet, these people wouldn't believe it. But in a way, it's true. Now, I wish them no ill. As a Christian, I would like for all of them to know Christ and be saved. But Mr. Hauser, I feel like we've got people leading the country that are just divorced from reality. That may sound like an overstatement, but it's really true, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of what I say in the book is a description of what they call secular humanism, and they're divorced from reality because secular humanism, at its core, basically believes that we humans are gods. We're equivalent to God. And when we attempt to make ourselves equivalent to God, history proves to us that there is a God. When mankind is allowed to operate in that fashion, when some of us believe we're equivalent to God, look what we're capable of.
Mm-hmm.
I point out the Soviet Union. I point out Nazi Germany. I point out communist China. These are godless. Those were and are godless places, and what they also were enormous tragedies in terms of not just economics, but human dignity and human rights. They were just awful places to live. And that's what you get when you divorce yourself from God.
America, we've got such bounty. I mean, we outpace other nations on agriculture, and so much of America, they call the Midwest the breadbasket of the world. They call much of the West Coast, the salad bowl of the world, because the majority of lettuce and tomatoes comes out of even California. I guess here's my question. With all of our blessing and bounty and accomplishments, could all the good of America ultimately be turned around to be some of the most wicked, malicious works in the world if we don't recover our spiritual and constitutional DNA?
Yeah, it can. I mean, with part of the problem, I believe, is that I've heard it said that good times breed weak people and hard times breed strong people. We have had extraordinarily good times since the end of World War II. But I go back to, my grandfather, Conrad Hauser, whom I knew very well. He was quite an old gentleman when he passed away, so I knew him well into my 30s. He was a child of the Great Depression, as was my grandmother, and they had an entirely different outlook on the world than we do. We tend to now. And so, yes, with all this bounty, what have we become? We've become intellectually lazy. We've become spiritually lazy. And we have we've allowed ourselves to go down the path of our own self-destruction because we haven't had to work for it.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about your book. Folks, if you're just tuning in, Alex McFarland here. We're talking with John Anthony Hauser, the author of a book, The Destruction of Liberty, Creating the American Socialist Aristocracy. Got a couple of questions, but where can people get the book, John?
If you go onto my website, you can easily get the book. You can also find it on Amazon. You can find it on Xulon Press. That's Xulon Press. It's a division of Salem Books. But my website, www.jahauser.com. You can easily find out more about me, more about what's in the book, and you can click on a button and get one too. Get a copy.
What is the American Socialist Aristocracy? The subtitle there. What would that socialist aristocracy be?
So, the two main themes of the book are socialism and aristocracy. Socialism being the primacy of the public sector, meaning government, state, and bureaucracy, over the private sector and private initiative and personal freedom. And aristocracy, which is a social construct that was sort of originated in the feudal medieval ages, where there were a few lords who were above the law and were a law unto themselves, and they were above the rest of us, and we were called the peasantry. And those two themes seem to be incompatible, but history has proved to us that they actually go hand in hand. The ironic part is that all socialist regimes that have ever come into power came into power by calling themselves the defenders of the downtrodden, and you know, they said that they were going to bring in a fairness and equality, but in the end, what did they do? They simply threw out the old aristocracy and replaced it with themselves on top. And you see this playing out in our own society right now, where we have a two-tiered system of justice. If you are one of the people they don't like, you're persecuted. But if you're one of the people who are on the philosophically or politically connected, you're protected. And you're protected from the consequences of your own actions. And we're watching every day when we turn on the news, we see that.
Yeah, I mean, this is so true. I mean, look at criminals that have been exonerated. Look at I believe President Trump, and I've had many attorneys, including Alan Dershowitz, I've interviewed, and Donald Trump. This trial in New York was a sham. This conviction. You're so right. I mean, when you're on the wrong side of the political left, they will use the DOJ and the courts to persecute you. You know, it's interesting, like you say. They sell themselves to the populace as the friend of the downtrodden. But, you know, the subtitle of your book, with the socialist aristocracy, I think about people like AOC and Nancy Pelosi, AOC, the Biden administration, forcibly keeping the borders open, yet they live in gated communities. You know, Al Gore and the climate activist Paul Ehrlichman, you know, wanting to take away air conditioning and internal combustion engines, and yet the environmental activists fly around the world in their, you know, jets. It's amazing, John. I've debated vegans, atheist, socialist vegans at university campuses that are arguing with me in leather shoes and leather coats with leather briefcases. So there's this disparity between their ideology and how they want to control our lives, but they themselves, they don't submit to their own boundaries, do they? No, and one of the classic remarks I've heard from a guy named Klaus Schwab, and you know, he's the leader of this globalist outfit called the Davos Group. Right. You know, he says that in 10 years you'll own nothing, and you'll be thankful for that. And I'm like, well, in 10 years will you own nothing? Of course not. You're one of the 1%ers. You'll own everything, and that's what they're angling for. Yeah. So their own hypocrisy calls them out. Well, it really does. And so let me ask you this: how can we help people? And I mean, even Christians and conservatives and pastors sometimes that I feel like I have to persuade the government and the culture that has brought the most good and the most numbers of people being the beneficiaries: liberty, prosperity, stability, innovation, the betterment of the human condition. It's been principled capitalism, Judeo-Christian representative republic, our nation. How do we persuade people that the greatest good for the greatest amount of people has been through American liberty?
I think you persuade them by throwing that argument back in the faces of if it's a detractors. If you look at, say, Nancy Pelosi, and I point this out in my book several times, Nancy Pelosi, Bernie Sanders, even Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, they're the first people to rail against the so-called evils of capitalism, and yet they do not hesitate to exploit it for their own benefit at every opportunity. If capitalism is so bad, then why are you all so good at using it for your own profit?
Yeah. And, it's like whenever I'm at universities and students during the Q&A, they'll come to the microphone and they'll, rail on me for, having a book in print and, telling me what I should be doing if I was altruistic and, generous, although they have no idea what I do on the side of benevolence and generosity. I'll say, well, look, you're telling me how to live my life. How about you? If you're concerned, why don't you give away what you have? I'm not telling you how to control your life. Why are you telling me how to control my life? Well, listen, we're almost out of time. This is our first meeting, John and Mr. Hauser, and I want to converse with you again. I appreciate you so much. Website, jahauser, HAUSER.com, jahauser.com, the book, The Destruction of Liberty. Are you speaking? How may people find you in your interviews and your speaking, sir?
Well, right now, I have a publicist who's setting up interviews and things like that. I mean,
Sure.
I would say if you go onto my website and you want to communicate with me, there's a place on there that you can do that.
jahauser.com. Alex McFarland here. Thanks for listening. Keep your radio tuned to the American Family Radio Network. God bless you, and God bless America.